Hello, my friends. If you're a dentist and you're wondering how can I get out of the chair, spend less time drilling teeth, maybe no time seeing patients, then you're in the right place. That's what we're going to talk about in this video. Stay tuned. All right, this clip is actually from our private group discussion just a week ago. And our private group, if you're not aware, is the entrepreneurial training ground where we teach dentists how to develop that skill set to craft the kind of practice life that they want, whether that's seeing patients full-time or not seeing any patients at all. So we're going to jump into this video clip right now where I'm going to talk about the math about how does one actually get out of the chair clinically. Here we go. So I got a question. Here's what happened. Someone replied to my last video that went out. You probably saw it. I interviewed one of our clients. I just happened to be in the area, so it worked out. And so the question was, well, the reason why, this is a person who wrote me in response to that video, and they were in the program, but they didn't stay in the program after their time was up. They did get results, but they thought, so the comment was this: so your program teaches dentists, how to work harder, work faster, work more efficiently, but not necessarily how to get out of the chair. And, kind of like calling me out a little bit, like, well, I see that's kind of like what you did though. And so I sit back, I'm thinking, that's interesting that one would have that approach. But looking at the time when this person was in the program, we didn't have private group. And so kind of, miss the boat on that, which is the whole point of private group, right? Because that's why you guys are here. So private group is all about the entrepreneurial thinking as to how one gets out of the chair over time, should you want to. So let's look at this, as this is the math of getting out of the chair. Right? So what do we teach? We teach maximize. So this is like, say, standard practice, okay? Same size of practice. Say this is, I don't know, 5-watt practice. And a practice right here is doing $1 million, okay? So this is state one. They come to us, we assess this practice, they join the program, they're $1 million practice. Great. Yes, our program does absolutely teach how to ramp up systems, how to ramp up efficiency, how to ramp up leadership, how to ramp up marketing, internal and external. Why? Because I want this practice to go to 2 million or even more, 500 per chair. That's where I want them to be. Why do I want them at max value? Like a lot of my recordings lately are talking about maximum value, maximum value. Why? Because if you're at maximum value, what ends up happening just as a byproduct is that you have the best team, the best systems, you have some cushion, you have the ability to, if something happens to you, the practice doesn't tank. Like a lot of good things come out of that. And you're also making more money in the process. So yes, our program absolutely is geared to pushing people to maximum value. And yes, that does mean that in the initial condition, the owner dentist works more, works faster, has more output. But it doesn't have to be that way unless they want it to be that way. So you got to look at the math though. So let's look at it. So this initial practice, current state, 60% overhead, netting 400K. The doctor does 70%, the hygiene team does 30%. Typical, okay? Nothing fancy here, nothing magical. Now we go to a $2 million practice. The overhead ticks up. Why does it tick up? Well, I've added probably, more staff. I've got maybe more wages. I'm spending more on marketing, etc. Now this owner dentist, they're maxing out. They're just pushing real hard. Okay. Can you do $1.4 million? Yes, I've done $1.4 million. It's not impossible to do. So people look at that number and like, well, I can't do that. We have dentists in our program that are doing like 2.4. So it's definitely possible. It's just what are you doing with the time? Now hygiene's doing 600. So again, 70-30 split. Okay, nothing fancy. Now, can I continue at this pace? Am I happy at this pace? Is this the life that I want? That's the question. I'm making good money. I'm netting 700K. It's a good day. Right? It's a good year. However, maybe I don't want that. Maybe I want to cut back a little bit. I want to drop down to 3.5 days. I bring in an associate. Okay, so just going to move down here to this state now is owner and one associate. So now 400K of the owner's production goes to an associate, but I got to pay him. So we're going to pay them 40% because that's in our market what we're paying associates, okay? Which brings our overhead up though to 77%. Now this is, I'll get to this in a moment. These are heavy numbers, but I'm assuming debt repayment in here and average conditions when a client comes to us. Now my net drops to 540, but I bought back some time. Now, what about getting out of the chair completely? Because this happened actually in our last private group. One of our members, gave a spontaneous testimonial of how he had, personal issues and health issues kind of all hit at the same time. And he had to take a year out of practice, and the practice ran, and he still pulled profit out of it and was able to manage his stuff during that time. And in fact, he's now in the process of opening a second practice that is like entirely focused on a specific procedure, which is sleep, rather than, getting back into the drill and fill, just because this clicked for him, right? So let's go to the third scenario. Now I have two associates who are doing all the production. Me as the owner, I'm not doing anything. So Nathan, for the practice you just bought, this is what you're doing, right? Hygiene's doing 600, so the same, 70-30. But now I'm paying my associates 560 grand of that. My overhead jumps substantially. This is an ugly number. But again, I'm assuming debt repayment, et cetera, so it's high. It might be less. It will be absolutely less if you've paid your debt. If you have no debt on this practice, you can double this number. Like you could take your profit and double that. But you're still netting, almost $250,000, and you're not touching patients at this point. So, and the reason why I know that that's the case is because the average EBITDA in a practice is 20 to 25%. Here I'm showing 12%. Again, kill all the debt, and you're probably well within that range. This probably jumps to 480, 500 in profit, and you're not touching patients. How do I know that this works? Because this is what corporates do all the time. Right? This is how your practice is valued. This is how they're run. This is how people who have multiple practices operate, and so on, right? This is the same. If you have more than one practice, you've seen this math because this is just how it works. Now, your profit margin shrinks if your top line doesn't change, right? So if the same $2 million and I add associates to do the production, yes, my profit's going to shrink. So I went from 700,000 with my own two hands to 240, and I don't touch patients. Now, it depends what you want, right? This is a trade-off. Am I cool with this number and I don't have to do anything? I have to manage the practice. Maybe I have to, put some inputs in, but I don't have to treat patients. This is a pretty good deal if you can't treat patients, disability, etc., right? So all kinds of reasons why this works. And again, multiple practice ownership. Now, let's say I don't want my net to drop. I want to keep the 700, but I want to get to here. How do I do it? Now your top line has to go up, right? Because what's 12% profit of the 2 million brings me the 240, right? But if I want to get 700, I need 30% profit. Well, 35%. So now I can't probably swing that in this model, which means I've got to get up and I've got to take this number to 3 million, 4 million. So this is why I tell people, okay, the practice that you have today, if you want to take yourself out of the practice completely and keep your net profit where it is, you have to replace yourself with associates. But you have to keep growing the practice. So if you do simple math in my practice, for the person who asked this question, so I was pulling 7 figures out of my practice when I was in there full time. Then I started adding associates and kept pulling the numbers. How? Because we went from 2 million to 4 million to 5 million to 7 million. At 7 million, even if I'm still producing, I'm still only netting 12%, 15%, let's say, which was my number, but it was all associates, do the math, you're there. But you have to grow the practice in order to do it. So there's two ways to skin this. One is I'm happy with the reduced profit, but I don't have to touch patients. So I can golf 5 days a week and still make $250,000. That's entrepreneurial business ownership. This is what private group is all about, right? Or I want to keep my 700,000, my $1 million in profit, but I don't want to touch patients. Well, hey, you're the business owner, you design it, but it means you can't do it in 5 chairs anymore. Now you need 10 chairs, 12 chairs. You need not one associate, not two, but 4. You need not 2 hygiene, but 4 or 5. And now you can do it. You can have your cake and eat it too. So that's how the math works. We've been teaching this the entirety of private group, right? Because all the systems, all the strategies, all the thinking as to how to run a practice and think like an entrepreneur and create these processes and systems and replace yourself with people and delegation and leadership, all of these things come together so that you can choose your own adventure based on these rough numbers, what you want, and then get there. So hopefully that makes sense. Because I don't think I've ever really just sat down and said, okay, like here's what it looks like to pull yourself out of the chair. I've been teaching how to do it since private group was private group ever, like since, I don't know, 2-3 years now, but we never actually sat down to look at numbers maybe in this way. So hopefully you found that helpful.